Hello everyone. Welcome to Lessons from Life. Have you ever lived next door to someone and thought you knew their whole story? I did. For almost 8 years, I lived beside an old woman named Mrs. Rose. She was quiet, always polite, always alone. Every morning she watered the flowers outside her little blue house. Every evening she sat beside the same window and watched the street. I never saw visitors, never heard laughter, never saw family photographs in her windows. I simply assumed she preferred living alone. I was wrong, very wrong, because behind that quiet house, Mrs. Rose was carrying a secret that had been breaking her heart for decades. I first met her when I moved into the neighborhood. I was 29, recently divorced, and trying to start my life again. The neighborhood was peaceful, children played in the street, neighbors greeted one another, and then there was Mrs. Rose. She lived alone in the small blue house directly beside mine. One afternoon, I noticed her struggling with a heavy box. I walked over. "Can I help you?" She looked surprised, then smiled. "That would be kind." I carried the box inside. It was filled with old photographs, letters, and children's toys. I noticed a tiny red sweater lying on top. Mrs. Rose quickly closed the box. "Old memories," she said. I didn't ask questions. I should have. Over the years we became friendly. Not close. Just friendly. I would bring her groceries. She would leave fresh bread outside my door. Sometimes we'd sit on her porch and talk about ordinary things, the weather, gardening, the neighborhood. But whenever I asked about her family, she changed the subject. One evening I asked casually, "Do you have children?" Her smile disappeared. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "I had a son." "Had?" She looked toward the road. "He isn't part of my life anymore." I didn't know what to say, so I changed the subject. She thanked me with a smile. But I noticed something that night. She cried after I left. A few months later, something strange happened. I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard crying. It was coming from Mrs. Rose's house. I looked through my window. Her living room light was on. I almost went over. Then I heard a man's voice. "Mom." I froze. A man's voice? At that hour? I stepped outside. The crying stopped. Mrs. Rose opened her front door. Her face was pale. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She nodded quickly. "Yes, everything is fine." But her hands were shaking. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I said goodnight. The next morning, she was gone. She didn't answer her door. Her curtains stayed closed. I became worried. After 2 days, I contacted the local hospital. She wasn't there. Then, on the third evening, I found an envelope underneath my front door. My name was written on it. Inside was a short note. "If something happens to me, please look after the blue box in my attic." There was no signature, but I knew exactly who had written it. Mrs. Rose. I went to her house. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was strangely quiet. I called her name. No answer. I searched the house. The kitchen, the bedroom, the living room, nothing. Then I remembered the note. The attic. I climbed the narrow stairs. Dust covered everything. Old furniture, boxes, Christmas decorations, and in the corner, a small blue wooden box. I opened it. Inside was a collection of letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to one person, Daniel. Some were decades old, others were recently written. I picked up the first letter. "My dear Daniel." I kept reading. And slowly, I discovered the truth. Mrs. Rose had a son. His name was Daniel. When he was 19, he left home after a terrible argument with his mother. He wanted to marry a woman she strongly disapproved of. Mrs. Rose was afraid. She said things she didn't mean. Daniel left that night, and he never came back. For years, Mrs. Rose believed he had abandoned her. But she continued writing letters. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, even though she had nowhere to send them. Then I found something that made my hands tremble. A newspaper clipping. Daniel had been living in another state. He had married, had a daughter, built a small business. He had tried to contact his mother several times, but the letters had never reached her. Why? Because they had been returned to sender. And eventually, Daniel stopped trying. At the bottom of the box was a photograph. A young man stood beside a woman and a little girl. On the back was written, "My family. I wish Mom could meet them." I sat on the attic floor and cried. All those years, two people had loved each other, both had been waiting, both had been hurt, and neither knew how to take the first step. I searched through the letters again. Then I found one written only 3 months earlier. Daniel, I'm getting older now. I don't know how much time I have left. If you ever find this letter, I want you to know that I was wrong. I was afraid of losing you. And because I was afraid, I lost you anyway. The final line broke my heart. I still leave the porch light on for you. That night, I sat on Mrs. Rose's porch. The light above the door was still on. I wondered where her son was, whether he was alive, whether he remembered her. Then I noticed something. A small envelope lying beneath the porch chair. It had arrived that morning. Inside was a letter. This time, the handwriting was unfamiliar. It was from Daniel's daughter. She had found Mrs. Rose through an online genealogy website. She wanted to meet her grandmother. I couldn't believe it. After all those years, someone had finally found her. But where was Mrs. Rose? The next morning the police called. They had found her at a nearby train station. She had become confused and wandered away. She was safe. I drove to the hospital immediately. When I entered her room, she looked frightened. I sat beside her. I found your blue box. Her eyes filled with tears. You shouldn't have. I found something else too. I handed her the letter. Her hands trembled as she read it. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "My granddaughter?" I nodded. "She wants to meet you." Mrs. Rose covered her face and began to cry. Not the quiet tears I'd seen before. These were different. They were tears of relief, of regret, and perhaps hope. 2 weeks later, a young woman arrived at the Blue House. She was 26. Her name was Emily. She stood at the front door for almost a minute before knocking. Mrs. Rose opened it. Neither spoke. They simply stared at each other. Then Emily whispered, "Grandma?" Mrs. Rose broke down. She reached for her, and Emily stepped forward. They hugged. A grandmother and granddaughter meeting for the first time. After 26 years. Daniel didn't come that day. He wasn't ready, and I understood. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't happen in one beautiful moment. Sometimes people need time. But Emily came back every weekend. She brought photographs, stories, videos, pieces of the family Mrs. Rose had missed. Slowly, the empty house began to change. The curtains opened. The porch became brighter. Flowers appeared everywhere. And for the first time in years, Mrs. Rose laughed. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. I was watering my garden when I heard a car stop outside the Blue House. A man stepped out. He stood there for several seconds. He looked older than the photograph. But I knew immediately. Daniel. He walked slowly toward the front door. Mrs. Rose was sitting on the porch. When she saw him, she stood up. Neither moved. Then Daniel whispered, "Mom." She answered, "I'm sorry." Daniel shook his head. "No, Mom, I'm sorry too." And then, after almost 40 years apart, they hugged. I watched from my window. I didn't want to interrupt. It was one of the most heartbreaking and beautiful things I'd ever seen. Two people who had lost decades, finally choosing not to lose another day. Mrs. Rose passed away 3 years later. Peacefully. Surrounded by her son, granddaughter, and the people who had become her family. Before she died, she gave me the little blue box. "Keep it," she said. "What for?" I asked. She smiled. "To remind you not to wait too long." Today, that box sits on a shelf in my home. It's empty now. The letters are with Daniel. The photographs are with Emily. The box itself remains with me. I've thought about Mrs. Rose many times since then. Her story taught me something I will never forget. Sometimes people aren't separated because they stop loving each other. They're separated because pride, fear, anger, and silence become stronger than their love. And sometimes all it takes is one person to open the door, one phone call, one apology, one simple sentence, "I still care about you." If you're listening to this, and there's someone in your life you haven't spoken to in years, maybe you don't need to solve everything today. Maybe you don't even know how to apologize. Just take the first step. Send the message, make the call, leave the door open. Because tomorrow isn't promised, and sometimes the person waiting on the other side of your silence is waiting for you too. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe this channel to see more heart-touching story. See you in the next video.